I don't believe in coincidences anymore. Not after last spring, when I realized I was seeing the same Uber driver in every city I visited. I travel for work, brand partnerships, retail build-outs, the kind of job that lives in airport lounges and hotel hallways. I'm used to being anonymous in motion. New airport, new ride, new room key. That anonymity makes routine feel safe. You expect randomness. You count on it. That's why the first time didn't register as anything but noise. Just another ride, another name, another gray car filed away alongside the thousands of tiny moments that blur together on the road. It was Chicago in March. Rain lashed sideways and the wind felt like it was coming from under the pavement. My flight landed late. Baggage claim took forever. When I finally stepped outside, suitcase squeaking, I opened the app and ordered a car. A driver accepted instantly, almost before the spinning ring completed a full circle. Name: Aaron. Rating: 4.98. Gray Camry. The photo was forgettable, mid-30s, close-cropped hair, neutral smile. The pickup ETA started at 8 minutes, then jumped to 3, then 1. The little car icon crawled, then teleported, and I told myself the GPS lagged in the rain. The Camry pulled up with a soft hiss, headlights diffused in mist. He rolled down his window and said my name in a tone that was almost a question, almost a confirmation, like he already knew I would say yes. I slid into the back seat, damp air replaced by heater breath and that overly sweet smell of black ice pine trees. Every rideshare has its own interior signature. A phone charger tangled under receipts, coins skittering in cup holders, mystery crumbs embedded in floor mats. His had nothing. The car was unnaturally tidy, almost staged. Only a single cracked phone mount on the dash, a tiny chip in the windshield shaped like a comma, and a navy hoodie folded idly on the passenger seat. The radio was off. The windows stayed fogged around the edges. He drove smoothly, neither chatting nor silent. He hummed sometimes, tuneless under his breath, something that almost formed a melody before falling apart. I glanced up when he pulled past a line of taxis and asked if Wacker or Lower Wacker was faster. He didn't answer. He took lower without signaling. He never took his eyes off the road, not even to check the rear view. But I noticed it anyway. A small beaded bracelet on his wrist, wooden beads, one bead scuffed lighter than the others, like it had been rubbed obsessively. I chalked him up as one of the hyper-professionals, 5,000 rides, no patience for small talk, mind on the map. If there was one oddity, it arrived as we exited near my hotel and he slowed to a creep. He said, without turning, "It's always this corner," and then didn't explain what he meant. The corner looked like any other. A bus shelter haloed with neon, a late-night sandwich place wafting onions into the cold. He stopped in the loading zone, the app chimed, and he said, "Get some sleep," like he'd said it to me before. I tipped, rolled my suitcase into the lobby, and stood under the lobby lamps shaking rain from my hair, while the Camry idled for 3 seconds longer than normal, and then pulled away. Dallas was 2 weeks later. Dry heat, baked concrete, a rental conference center that smelled like fresh paint and warm plastic. My day ended at 9. I walked outside, pulled up a ride, and watched a driver accept in under a second. This time the name said Adrian. Photo: a man about the same age, same haircut, slightly different jawline. Gray Camry again. It could have been any gray Camry. That's the thing about rental fleets, they render cars invisible. But when I opened the back door and sat down, the same scent hit me. Black ice, like a remembered dream. The same cracked phone mount. The same tiny comma chip in the glass, in the same place. The same navy hoodie folded on the front seat. Same creases like the fabric had learned to lie that way. I stared at the windshield with heat rising under my coat. You can rationalize almost anything when the circumstances are ordinary enough. Maybe that chip is a common pattern from highway pebbles. Maybe a million drivers buy the same phone mount. Maybe he worked in both cities, flying to drive a premium market. But the bracelet was there too, on my right wrist this time, the same worn bead. As we merged onto the highway, he hummed, soft as an exhale. My skin prickled. "Have we driven together before?" I asked, aiming for polite curiosity. He smiled without showing teeth. "I do a lot of airport runs," he said. "That's not what I asked," I said, then immediately regretted the edge in my voice. He didn't answer anyway. He took an exit I didn't know, and then rejoined the correct route 2 miles later, adding 4 minutes. The app showed a surge recalculation like it was apologizing on his behalf. I watched the little map blue route recenter and told myself the highway construction was confusing. That's Dallas. "At my hotel," he said, "get some sleep," in the same cadence as Chicago, like he was dropping a line from a script. I tipped. "Ped again." He idled again. And when he finally pulled away, I watched the taillights sit for that same unnatural 3 count and felt my stomach bottom out in a way I couldn't explain. Portland, 3 weeks after that, was where denial stopped working. It was drizzling because, of course, it was. Gray light filtering through a ceiling of clouds. I finished a late lunch with our local team and decided not to walk the mile back up the hill to my hotel. The moment I opened the app and slid my thumb to confirm, the driver notification popped in with algorithmic cheer. Name: Aaron, 1A, 1R. Photo different again, but the eyes were the same distance apart, the same sleepy intensity. Gray Camry. ETA, 1 minute. He was already there when I stepped to the curb, like he'd been expecting my decision. I hesitated with my hand on the handle and scanned the plate. It matched the app. He greeted me with my name pronounced perfectly, then started humming before we moved. The car was a photocopy of every detail I remembered and had tried not to remember. Same chip, same mount, same hoodie, same bracelet, this time with the lighter bead positioned perfectly at the top, like it had been staged for me to notice. I didn't ask questions this time. I pretended to read emails. I typed nonsense in a note to make my fingers look busy. When we stopped at a red light, I lifted my phone to photograph the chip, and my camera glitched twice, the shutter refusing to fire. He turned his head a fraction, noticing the reflection. "No photos," he said. Not unkind, but final. The light changed. We drove. I watched our blue dot path, watched his knuckles flex, watched the beaded bracelet catch a dull gray glow and wink as the lighter bead rolled under his wrist. When we pulled up at my hotel, he said, "It's always this corner," and then, "Get some sleep," in that same paired rhythm, and I couldn't move. For a second, because my body was busy recognizing a pattern my mind had resisted. I reported him on the app after I got upstairs. Not a full complaint, just a note. Driver may be operating in multiple cities under different names. Same car details. The support reply arrived in under 2 minutes. "Thanks for your feedback. We take safety seriously. Please provide any additional information such as dates and license plates." I typed the plates from memory and realized I was mixing digits from 3 cities. When I looked at my trip history to confirm, the Dallas ride had vanished. Chicago remained. Portland remained. Dallas was gone like it had never happened. I told myself I was tired. I told myself I was building ghosts out of gas and glass and chat scripts. I set my phone on the nightstand and lay awake listening to the elevator cables hum through the walls. At 2 in the morning, I sat up, heart pounding, certain I had heard his humming, low and unfixed, in the hallway. I opened the peephole. No one was there. The carpet looked freshly vacuumed. My suitcase stood where I'd left it. The hall camera blinked a red dot. In my chest, my pulse drew lines between corners of the country, between different app names and the same soft laugh of a car door closing. And I watched those lines connect. I stopped using rideshares for 2 weeks after Portland. I walked when I could, took taxis like it was 2009, and begged coworkers for rides. That kind of stubbornness works until your plane lands after midnight in a city you barely know. The hotel is 12 miles away, and the taxi line is a mirage of empty poles and retractable belts. I stared at the app icon like it was a loaded question. Then I tapped. It was Phoenix. Dry wind curling heat into the parking garage, sodium lights making everything look dusty. A driver accepted before the request animation finished. Name, Arian. Gray Camry again. I told myself the alphabet was finite and people loved the same letters. He arrived in less than a minute, rolling up so quietly I only noticed when the headlights washed over my shoes. I opened the rear door, and the black ice hit me like a memory I didn't want. Same mount, same windshield chip, same navy hoodie folded with military neatness. He hummed before he put the car in gear. "I think we've met," I said, not a question. He glanced at me in the rear view for the first time. "You're not wrong," he said, and then merged without looking. "What do you mean?" "Some routes repeat." "Why?" "Because some people do." I watched the map like it could save me from the conversation. He took the correct highway, exited at the correct place, and still paused at the corner before the hotel, as if the car had muscle memory. "It's always this corner," he murmured, not to me, but to the windshield. "Get some sleep." I didn't tip that night. I paid in the app and walked straight past the front desk into the elevator, holding my breath like I could smuggle my fear to a higher floor where it would thin out. In the room, I turned on the TV and muted it, just so something would move besides my thoughts. I slept in 10-minute slices. The next morning, I called my company's travel coordinator and asked if I were ready, as we're pooled through a business account that might be assigning me the same driver. She said we book individually, nothing is pooled, and told me to screenshot plates if I felt unsafe. I didn't tell her the Dallas trip had evaporated from my history. I figured the only way to stop doubting my own memory was to test him. In Boston the following week, after a long day of measuring floor plans with a laser that made me feel like a cat, I stood outside the Prudential Center and opened the app. I set my pickup a block away and used a fake name my friend Maya made on her phone, then watched who accepted. Name, Rian. Gray Camry. I walked the opposite direction, turned twice around a kiosk, and then circled back to the original pickup point. His car was already there, idling with the caution lights blinking like sleepy eyes. He leaned over and looked right at me like we'd agreed to meet. Maya texted, "Are you filming this?" I didn't have the nerve to get in. I walked to a taxi stand instead. The driver, human, chatty, uninterested, told me the city had been flooded with rideshares lately, guys sleeping in their cars to maximize quotas. I wanted his normal to rub off on me. Back at the hotel, the front desk had a message. A package had been left for me. They handed over a small, unbranded envelope, light as air. Inside was a printout of my Chicago receipt, my Dallas receipt, somehow recovered, and my Portland receipt, each with my name highlighted and a yellow sticker attached. On the sticky, in neat block letters, someone had written, "Same car, same corner." The concierge said a courier dropped it off. No sender, no return address. I took the elevator upstairs and locked the bolt and used the bar like I was bracing a door against the weather. I texted Maya the photos. She wrote back, "Okay, that's not funny anymore." I didn't answer. That night, I woke at 3:17 to humming, faint as dust. It threaded under the door and through the vent and down the hall like it was made of air. I put my ear to the peephole and heard it clearer. The same not quite melody, the same soft insistence, like a tune someone learned from a lullaby and then forgot how to end. I didn't open the door. I lay awake until the alarm decided it was morning and pretended nothing had happened. The next city was New Orleans, heavy with humidity and trumpet echo. I promised myself I'd walk. I lasted until the rain pinned me beneath a balcony. I ordered a car, half hoping a stranger would break the pattern just by existing. Name: Ern, Gray Camry. When he pulled up, the plate matched the app. I set my phone to video and held it low, capturing the comma chip and the bracelet as proof for later. The file was saved as a corrupted thumbnail that wouldn't open. I emailed it to myself. The email bounced with an error I'd never seen. He drove without speaking and let me out a block from the hotel because the street was closed for a parade, and still he found a way to pause at the same kind of corner, a bus shelter, a liquor store glow, a puddle catching neon. Before saying, "Get some sleep," I stared at the rain until he merged into it and vanished. I went to the front desk and asked if they'd had any couriers for me. The clerk checked, shook his head, then paused and said, "Actually, someone dropped this earlier." He reached under the counter and placed a small plastic bag on the marble. Inside was a single wooden bead, scuffed pale on one side like it had been worried by a thumb for miles. There was no note. I didn't touch it. I left. I left the bead on the front desk marble and walked out into the rain like it might wash the whole thing off me. Flying out the next morning felt like fleeing, even if my ticket had been booked for weeks. In the airport bookstore, I picked up a cheap spiral notebook and a ballpoint pen because it occurred to me that whatever kept scrambling my phone couldn't reach paper. On the first page, I wrote the cities in a column: Chicago, Dallas, Portland, Phoenix, Boston, New Orleans, and underlined them until the ink bled. Then I wrote, same car, same corner, same humming, same bracelet. And as if saying it out loud on paper would make a difference, do not get in again. Denver was next on my calendar. 3 days of site visits in neighborhoods that all smelled like coffee and cold. I rented a car at the airport and told myself I was finally out of the loop. Alone on the highway, hands at 10 and 2, I let the rhythm of white lines talk me out of paranoia. The relief lasted until I checked into my hotel, tossed my keys on the bed, and looked out the window at the intersection below. Bus shelter haloed with a liquor store glow. A puddle catching neon. The exact geometry of the other cities, like a stencil, had been pressed over this block and traced. A gray Camry idled half in shadow, hazard lights blinking slow. I stepped back, heart lurching like I'd been pushed. I stayed upstairs, ordered room service. When I finally had to leave for a morning walkthrough, I took the service exit instead of the lobby and slipped out into an alley smelling like old fryer oil. I drove my rental in a series of dumb zigzags that wasted 20 minutes and all of my courage. No humming, no headlights hugging my bumper. I was halfway to believing the car outside had been a coincidence when I pulled into a gas station to fill up. The pump handle clicked. Static broke against the awning. Another car rose, loud up to the other side of my pump. The soft, specific sweetness of black ice drifted through the air as if the scent itself had memory. I looked without meaning to. Gray Camry, comma-shaped chip on the glass. The passenger window glided down a notch like a held breath being released. He didn't look at me. He didn't need to. He hummed something that almost formed a melody and then slipped out of tune. I replaced the pump nozzle with a violent clack and left with the cap hanging, a warning light blinking on my dash for 10 minutes before I dared to pull over and fix it. That afternoon, I filed a police report online because it felt like action. A week later, I received a polite email telling me to contact Rideshare support. I sent support another message with dates, times, fragments of plate numbers. They replied with a boilerplate paragraph about driver deactivation reviews and the importance of ride safety. The Dallas trip blinked in and out of my history again, an eye that couldn't decide whether it had seen what it had seen. Maya told me to stop playing defense. "Set a trap," she said on FaceTime, framed in her kitchen, hair piled like a crown. "Pick a time and place that doesn't make sense and see if he shows up, and I'm coming." I argued for 30 seconds, then said, "Okay," because I was tired of being the only one in the room with the humming. We chose Atlanta for a one-day blitz through a mall I hated. We set the pickup on Maya's phone 2 blocks from our hotel at 3:12 a.m., a time that didn't belong to anyone. We waited behind a shuttered coffee shop, the street glossy with dew, our breath ghosting. The request spun for half a second before a driver accepted. Name, Ari. Gray Camry. We walked toward the pin together, shoulders brushing. The car was already there, right front tire nudged against a storm drain like it had been parked carefully in the dark for a long time. He greeted us by both of our names without asking for confirmation. The app had only one. We got in anyway because some part of me needed Maya to hear the hum, to smell the air freshener, to see the comma chip and the bracelet pulsing dull in the dashboard glow. We rode in silence for 30 seconds. He took a left, then a right, then a long, slow glide toward a bus shelter facing a liquor store window, bright with stacked bottles, a puddle catching neon like a tiny fake galaxy. He eased to a stop in the loading zone, shifted into park, and whispered almost to himself, "It's always this corner." Maya squeezed my hand so hard, my rings bit skin. She leaned forward and said too bravely, "What corner is this to you?" He didn't turn. "The one where routes cross," he said. "The one that repeats no matter how far you fly. The one you remember without meaning to." My mouth went dry. "Why me?" He hummed instead of answering. The tune snagged at something deep I didn't want to see. It took me a full breath to place it. A lullaby my mother used to sing in the back of cabs when I was small and feverish, when city lights smeared together and corners looked like mirrors. I hadn't thought of it in 20 years. The final note flattened into silence like a coin set on a table and left there. "Drive," Maya said. He did without asking where. He looped the block and stopped again in front of the hotel. "Get some sleep," he said, and my name fit inside the sentence like a bead on a string. We stumbled into the lobby without speaking. The night clerk stared at us like we'd brought the weather inside. The next afternoon, Maya texted me from the airport. A small white envelope had been shoved under her door. Inside was a single wooden bead, scuffed pale on one side. No note, no explanation. She added, "I'm not staying for another night." I went for a walk because the hotel room felt like a box with a lid slowly lowering. I turned corners at random. I ended up at the same bus shelter without meaning to. Someone had taped a photocopy to the glass. My Chicago receipt, my Boston receipt, my New Orleans receipt, each with one line highlighted, the addresses of the corners. In the margin, neat block letters read, "Look up." I did. A security camera dome blinked a lazy red light, reflecting my own face back at me in fisheye. Across the street, a liquor store sign buzzed. Above it, in a second-floor window, a navy hoodie was draped over a chair with a precision that felt like a dare. That night, I moved hotels without telling anyone. I chose a bland high-rise 5 blocks away with a lobby that smelled like citrus and old carpet. The room had a view of a different intersection, different bus shelter, different neon glow. At 2:43 a.m., my phone lit with a push notification that wasn't from any app I recognized. "Your driver is here. No hurry." The screen dimmed, then died. Battery drained from 70% to black in a breath. I turned on the lamp and stared at the door until dawn. The next city was home. No trips, no hotels, just a week off while our team reworked a deadline. I told myself the pattern would break if I stopped moving. I took long walks in my neighborhood, noticed the way trees made green rooms out of sidewalks, noticed the bakery lady who called me honey, noticed how safe familiarity can make you feel. On the third day, I reached the corner by the bus stop and the liquor store, and the puddle that always catches the glow from the bodega sign. I hadn't seen it as a pattern before. My feet had known it before my head did. A gray Camry turned the corner slowly, hazard lights blinking, and pulled into a loading zone where a car never sat longer than a sliding door. It idled for 3 seconds past the time that looked normal. Then it pulled away. I went upstairs, sat at my kitchen counter, and wrote in the notebook until my wrist hurt. When I stopped, my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw no one, just the framed slice of hallway the camera could see and the ghosted reflection of my own eye. When I opened the door, an envelope slid forward on a whisper of air. Inside was a photocopy of a city map with a red X on my block and a sticky note in neat block letters. "Tonight, same corner." At sunset, I taped the sticky note into my notebook and tried to decide what kind of choice counts as safety. Calling the police felt like inviting them to watch me come apart. Ignoring it felt like leaving the door on the chain while someone tested the handle. I called Maya anyway. She answered on the first ring and told me to stay inside, to sleep with a chair under the knob, to let the night pass and throw the envelope away in the morning. I told her if I didn't show up, it wouldn't stop. It would just keep drawing X's on new maps until the map was the size of my whole life. She went quiet. Then she said, "Put me on speaker," and I did, and propped the phone on the window ledge while we both watched the street darken. At 11:50, I put on sneakers and a jacket and tucked the notebook in my pocket. I left my phone plugged into the wall. If whatever scrambled it couldn't reach paper, maybe it also couldn't reach me if I didn't carry it. The elevator hummed like a throat clearing. The lobby smelled like citrus trying to smother bleach. Outside, the corner looked like it always looks. A bus shelter, a liquor store, glow buzzsawing the air, a shallow puddle catching a slivered smear of neon. My block, but also every block that had warned me before. I stood under the shelter's plexiglass roof and watched my breath ye and disappear. At 12:02, the gray Camry turned onto the street with its hazard lights blinking, slow and patient, like eyes that didn't need to blink fast to stay awake. It pulled into the loading zone and idled exactly 3 seconds too long before the passenger window lowered a measured inch. He didn't look at me. He didn't have to. He hummed, and the tune reached out and found the old shape of my mother's lullaby and wore it like a coat. I didn't get in. I stepped closer, far enough to see the comma-shaped chip on the glass, the cracked phone mount, the Navy Who, die-folded on the front seat with a tension that read as care or control. The beaded bracelet was half hidden by his sleeve, one bead scuffed pale. My voice came out smaller than I intended. "Why me?" He didn't turn. "Because you don't let routes end," he said, like it was a compliment and a diagnosis. "You keep booking the pattern, even when you swear you won't." I shook my head. "I didn't book you." "You did," he said gently. "Writing counts." His hand, still on the wheel, rotated a quiet fraction. The pale bead rolled over his pulse. Corners, remember. A car passed, bass thudding, and for a heartbeat we were just two strangers under tired streetlights. Then the moment snapped back into the other version of the night, the one where the smell of black ice carried a memory like a virus, and the shape of the street clicked into the stencil the other cities had laid down. I took out the notebook and held it like a shield. What happens if I don't get in? He hummed. The melody flattened and slipped. I wait, he said. I follow. I show up where the corner learns your name. It's easier if you sit. My legs hated the idea. My brain hated my legs. I edged along the curb, staying out of reach of the door's sweep, and asked, "What's at the end?" He smiled without showing teeth, a curl of light in the reflection of the dash. "Ends are just the parts where you recognize the shape." He unlocked the rear door, a soft click that felt intimate. The interior light did not come on. He didn't invite me again. That felt worse than if he had... I walked away. Not far, just to the next corner where the bodega's blue sign buzzed in a way that made me think of old televisions. The Camry slipped into gear and rolled lengthwise beside me on the parallel street, always one building away, like we were two hands running down the opposite edges of the same table. At the next cross, I crossed. He arrived in front of me without seeming to accelerate, humming. The sound threaded from his car through mine like a wire. Around the block again and again. Every intersection wore the same geometry when the car was near, as if the city was less a grid than a rotation, as if the block had turned gently under my feet to meet it. I thought about running. Feet pumping, cut down an alley, climbing a fence, making a mistake. A headline would condense into a cautionary sentence. Instead, I went home. The Camry slid to a stop at the loading zone. I swiped the building keycard with two shaking fingers and didn't let myself look back. On the landing above my door, I listened. The engine idled 3 seconds longer than normal, then silence like a room closing its mouth. Inside, I locked the bolt and set the chain and pushed the chair under the knob because superstition and physics sometimes speak the same language. I picked up my phone to call Maya. The screen woke to a notification that wasn't from any app I owned. Trip complete. Rate your driver. The thumbnail map showed a blue line from my building to my corner to my building, a loop. The timestamp read 0317, a time I had not yet lived to see tonight. A 5-star highlight pulsed like a heartbeat under the words, "Get some sleep." I powered the phone off and slid it into a drawer. I opened the notebook. On a blank page, I wrote, in big, careful letters, "I did not get in." Then I underlined it, and the pen dug a groove I could feel from the other side. At 3:17, exactly the humming started, all faint and everywhere at once, inside the vent and the walls and the seam where the door met the frame. It was not outside. It was not at the corner. It was here, an old tune a stranger had borrowed and learned and sanded until it could slip through plaster. I pressed my ear to the wood and heard words surface like stones under foam. "It's always this corner." I slept after dawn. That afternoon, my building's doorman buzzed and said there was a package. The envelope was unmarked. Inside was a printed route receipt with my home address at both ends, a 0-mile trip rounded to a circle, and a single wooden bead, scuffed pale on one side. I didn't touch it at first. When I finally did, it felt warm, as if it had been pressed in a palm for a long drive. I don't use rideshares now. I walk. I take buses whose routes are printed and shared and public, whose drivers wave and roll their R's and complain about baseball like the world still obeys small talk. It hasn't stopped the corners from learning my face. I cross the street to avoid bus shelters and end up at another bus shelter. I move hotel rooms and find the same geometry framed anew from a different floor. Once, at a grocery store in a different neighborhood, a navy hoodie hung on the back of a chair at the coffee bar with the exact careful fold I knew. I left my cart and walked home with empty hands. I've stopped trying to explain it to people who need proof in the shape of a screenshot. The app eats evidence. Paper holds some of it until it doesn't. What I keep instead are notes, dates, times, the exact cadence of the hum, and the exact length of the pause between idling and leaving. I pretend information can be a lock. I have not yet found a key. Sometimes, when the air is still and the city is pretending to be quiet, I lean out my window and look down at the corner. Most nights it looks like a corner. Some nights it turns its face, and I see the other one through it, the one with all the cities layered, and the Camry gliding up slowly like a tide. When that happens, I leave the lamp on, and I write my name on the first line of a blank page, and then I don't write anything else, as if that could confuse a system that only ever needed confirmation. If you hear humming below your window that sounds like your childhood re-threaded through someone else's mouth, don't open the door. If a driver says he recognizes you because you never let roots end, believe him. If an envelope appears with a bead inside, throw it away or keep it, it won't make a difference. Corners are patient. They repeat until you notice. Then they repeat because you noticed. Tonight I'll tape a new note in the back of the notebook. Do not meet him at the corner. The ink will bleed, the paper will wrinkle. At some hour that belongs to no one, the phone will light on its own with a trip I didn't take. The message will say, "Get some sleep." I will try. And when I dream, the car will pull up with its hazards blinking like slow eyes, and the window will lower, and he will not look at me, and he will hum the end of a lullaby I cannot stop hearing, and I will understand that the ride was never about where I was going. It was about every corner deciding to meet me halfway.